this episode, we shift from gathering resiliency inputs to actually shaping a plan that people can use, and we focus on what it means to facilitate business continuity plan, BCP, development under real constraints. A BCP is a practical document and set of decisions that describes how an organization will continue essential work during a disruption, even if systems, facilities, staff, or vendors are not available in the usual way. The challenge is that continuity planning is easy to talk about in theory and surprisingly hard to do well in reality. Because time is limited, resources are limited, and people often want a plan that promises everything will be fine. Facilitation is the skill of helping a group turn priorities and analysis into clear, testable, and realistic actions without getting lost in anxiety, politics, or vague commitments. The heart of this lesson is learning how to build a BCP that respects constraints from the business impact analysis, BIA, while still being implementable. Before we continue, a quick note. This audio course is a companion to our course companion books. The first book is about the exam and provides detailed information on how to pass it best. The second book is a Kindle-only ebook that contains 1,000 flashcards that can be used on your mobile device or Kindle. Check them both out at cyber.author.me in the Bare Metal Study Guide series. A good place to begin is understanding what BCP development is trying to produce, because many beginners confuse a continuity plan with a disaster story or a technical recovery plan. A BCP focuses on business processes and essential services, not the technical steps to rebuild a server or restore a database. It answers questions like which functions must continue, who performs them, what minimum resources they require, and how those functions will operate when normal conditions are disrupted. It also clarifies how the organization will coordinate decisions, how communications will work, and how priorities will be managed when multiple problems happen at once. The BIA provides the logic for which functions are most critical and how quickly impacts become unacceptable. In other words, the BIA sets the boundaries for what must be protected first, while the BCP describes how to keep those priorities alive during the disruption itself. Time is the first major constraint, and it shows up in two different ways that people often mix together. One is planning time, meaning the time you have to develop the plan before something happens, which is usually limited and full of competing work. The other is operational time, meaning how long the organization can tolerate disruption before impacts become unacceptable, which is what the BIA helps define. Facilitating BCP development means acknowledging both, because a plan that takes a year to perfect might be useless if the organization needs improvements now. At the same time, a plan that ignores operational time constraints might recommend strategies that cannot meet the required continuity timelines. A helpful beginner mindset is that time constraints force prioritization, and prioritization is not a flaw in planning. It is the whole point. Resource constraints are the second major reality, and resources include more than money. Resources include people, skills, physical space, equipment, network capacity, alternate locations, vendor support, and even simple things like access to phones, contact lists, or transportation. During a disruption, resources may be reduced because staff are unavailable, facilities are inaccessible, and supply chains slow down. Facilitating BCP development requires you to ask not just what should happen, but what can happen given the likely resource limitations. This is where continuity planning can become uncomfortable, because the group may discover that they do not have enough trained staff for a key function or that too many essential tasks rely on one person. Good facilitation treats those discoveries as valuable because they reveal where the organization can improve before a crisis, not as reasons to hide the problem with optimistic language. Verification constraints are the third pillar, and they are often overlooked by new planners. Verification means you can confirm that the plan is correct, current, and workable, not just that it exists. Without verification, you risk building a plan that looks detailed but fails under pressure because it relies on outdated phone numbers, unrealistic assumptions, or untested dependencies. Verification also means that the plan's strategies align with the BIA requirements, such as acceptable downtime and minimum service levels. Facilitating with verification in mind changes how you write and review the plan, because you aim for statements that can be checked and practiced. For example, Saying the organization will move operations to an alternate location is not enough unless you define what alternate location is used, who authorizes the move, and how quickly essential staff can realistically get there. Verification turns planning from hopes into commitments that can be evaluated. Now we connect these constraints back to the BIA, because the BIA is the anchor that prevents continuity planning from becoming a popularity contest. A BIA identifies which functions are most critical and what the impact looks like if they fail over time. That creates a structured way to define priorities, such as which functions must be restored within hours versus which can wait days. Facilitating BCP development means making sure the plan clearly reflects those time-based priorities, rather than treating all functions as equally urgent. It also means translating impact language into continuity requirements, like minimum staffing, minimum data access, or minimum transaction capacity. When you keep the BIA in view, you can resolve disagreements by returning to impact and time rather than personal preference. That is one of the most useful roles of a facilitator because it keeps the discussion grounded. A practical facilitation challenge is helping teams describe continuity strategies at the right level of detail. Too little detail leaves the plan vague, but too much detail can make it brittle and hard to maintain. ABCP should describe how essential functions will continue, who is responsible, what resources are required, and what conditions trigger specific actions, but it should not become a technical manual. For beginners, think of it like a playbook for a sports team. It includes roles, signals, and priorities, but it does not attempt to predict every possible move in every possible scenario. The plan should enable fast decision-making, not slow it down. Facilitation helps keep the plan in that useful middle zone, where it is specific enough to guide action and flexible enough to survive unexpected details. Another common issue is confusion between continuity and full normal operations, which leads to unrealistic expectations. Continuity often means operating in a reduced or degraded mode, where the organization delivers the most essential outputs while accepting that other work pauses. Facilitating BCP development means helping stakeholders define what minimum service levels are acceptable and for how long. That can involve difficult trade-offs, like deciding that certain customer-facing services will be limited or that some reporting will be delayed. These trade-offs are not failures. They are deliberate choices to protect the mission and reduce harm when resources are constrained. A plan that promises full normal operations immediately is usually not honest, and dishonesty in a plan is dangerous because it creates false confidence. A strong facilitator helps the group be realistic and explicit about what continuity really means. Facilitation also involves managing assumptions, because continuity strategies often depend on assumptions that may not hold in a real crisis. People assume that the internet will work, that staff can travel, that vendors will respond quickly, or that an alternate site will be available. In ABCP, assumptions should be stated plainly and paired with contingencies where possible. For example, if remote work is a core continuity strategy, the plan should consider what happens if remote access is degraded or if many employees lose home power. If a vendor is essential, the plan should consider what happens if the vendor is impacted by the same regional event. The goal is not to eliminate all assumptions, which is impossible, but to reduce surprise by making assumptions visible and planning around the most fragile ones. This is where the facilitator's calm questioning can protect the organization from building a plan on wishful thinking. One of the most valuable outputs of BCP development is clear roles and decision authority, because chaos often comes from uncertainty about who can make which calls. During disruptions, decisions must be made quickly about priorities, resource allocation, and communications. ABCP should define who has authority to activate continuity procedures, who can approve major operational shifts, and who coordinates across teams. It should also define backups for those roles, because the primary person may be unavailable. Facilitating this part can be sensitive, because it touches organizational hierarchy and personal influence. The facilitator's job is to keep it practical and mission-focused, emphasizing that clarity reduces confusion and reduces risk. When everyone knows who decides, teams can act faster and with fewer conflicting directions. Verification shows up again when you think about how the plan will be kept accurate and usable. The plan should include mechanisms to confirm that contact lists are current, that alternate work locations remain available, that critical dependencies are still correct, and that staff know their continuity roles. Verification can be supported through exercises, reviews, and updates. But even before those, a facilitator can build verification into the plan by requiring clear statements, named owners, and defined triggers. For example, a plan that says the finance function will continue should also specify what continuing means in practice, such as processing payroll by a certain date or maintaining a minimum reporting capability. Then you can verify that the required systems, access, and staff capacity exist to support that minimum. When verification is embedded, the plan becomes easier to evaluate and improve over time. Finally, facilitating BCP development means balancing completeness with momentum, because a plan that never finishes is not protective. You often need to guide the group to produce a workable version that addresses the highest risk continuity needs first, then refine it. This is not about cutting corners. It is about applying time and resource constraints wisely so the plan delivers value quickly. A facilitator helps the group focus on essential functions, align strategies to BIA priorities, and document decisions in a way that can be tested and updated. The plan should be understandable to people who were not in the planning meetings, because in a real disruption, you may rely on substitutes or newly assigned staff. A plan that only makes sense to its authors is a fragile plan. The goal is to create clarity that survives stress, staff changes, and the messy reality of real-world disruptions. Business continuity planning succeeds when it is built on honest priorities, realistic constraints, and verification that the plan can actually work. Facilitating BCP development means turning BIA findings into time-based continuity requirements, then shaping strategies that respect limited staff, limited resources, and limited planning time. It also means guiding stakeholders to define minimum service levels, make difficult trade-offs explicitly, and document roles and decision authority so confusion does not become a second disaster. Verification keeps the plan grounded by pushing for statements that can be checked, practiced, and maintained as the organization changes. When these elements come together, a BCP becomes more than a document. It becomes a shared set of decisions that helps the organization keep its most important work moving when conditions are at their worst.
Thanks for listening. For more audio courses, daily newsletters, and more, please visit BareMetalCyber.com.